Today, Mark Metry interviews billionaires, New York Times bestselling authors, and legendary world-class human beings on his Top 100 podcast and speaks at events. He's the founder of View Dream, a digital marketing growth agency focusing on virtual reality and mixed reality. His primary goal here on planet Earth is to help others eliminate their internal enemy within and live a life of mental and emotional freedom. Please give a warm DreamBank welcome to Mark Metry.
How are you guys all doing today? Awesome. That's so cool. So first and foremost, big shout out to the DreamBank team, Jacob, a ton of people. I'm from Boston, very first time here in Wisconsin, Madison. So thank you guys for welcoming me to your city. So just real quick, I don't expect this. Has anybody here heard of my podcast, listened to me, see my content online? Awesome. Thank you, Holly. I appreciate it. And also big shout out to the people that are listening to this live. I don't know how many there are, but thank you so much. So I'm here today to not necessarily talk about myself, but to talk about you guys, okay? So put your name in there, okay? Whether it's Holly or Lisa or Jacob 2.0. And I sort of started this because fairly short time ago, not even that long ago, I used to be somebody who really struggled with their physical, mental health. I used to be over 200 pounds, super depressed, always had social anxiety my whole life. At one point, I was even suicidal. And I come from like sort of a computer background. I don't do that anymore. And as I was on my journey, I was just able to be like, whoa, I sort of went from like kind of a software version 1.0, sort of the basic of how we're all just sort of born in here into life, and then we wake up and it's sort of up to us on what we do with it. And I saw such great, tremendous changes that I sort of saw this analogy of like version 2.0. So if it's okay with you guys, I want to do a quick exercise, if that's cool with you. Okay, so let's do it. Okay, so everybody close your eyes. You don't have to do it, but close your eyes. And I want you to, breathe normally or take deep breaths. That's up to you. And I want you to sort of just imagine, just visualize yourself just sitting here in this room with, if you have a friend next to you or just completely random strangers, just sit there and sort of visualize yourself. And as you do that, I want you to sort of aim up, take sort of an aerial view of just this room, of all of us sitting here, me up here talking, the camera crew in the back, all of us just here together. Then I want you to imagine like a text bubble, like a speech bubble, like in those cartoons. I want you to imagine that pop out of your head, okay? And I want you now to just focus on an area of your life that you really care about, that you are really in love with. One of them for me is my family. It could be, you imagining your family. Then I want you to imagine another speech bubble. And I want you to imagine a picture or a word that assimilates another area of your life that you really are in care for. Another one for me is health, right? Physical and mental health. Now, as you imagine 2 or maybe 3 of those speech bubbles of different areas of your life that you really, really care about, now I want you to imagine if that got a little bit better. Imagine if, I could love a little bit more people. Imagine if, my whatever those areas are, my physical health was just a little bit improved. Imagine if my mental health was a little bit improved as well. Now, everyone open your eyes. So that is exactly what I'm here to talk to you guys about. So before I begin, does anybody actually know why I'm here today? Say it. Yes. Inspire us. Okay, cool. So the reason why I'm here today is because 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 20 years from now, I want to get some kind of an email or an Instagram DM or a LinkedIn message or whatever we're going to be using to talk to each other in the future about somebody in this room saying, I was in Madison, October 3rd, 2019. I heard you talk. And, when you said this, it really made me think about this differently. Or when you talked about that, it really enabled me to go home and just sort of take some actions in my own personal life. That's why I'm here. So, to begin further, I'm not here to change anybody's mind about anything. That's quite frankly none of my business. I'm just up here to speak and hopefully plant seeds, and it's up to you if they're going to grow or not. Because, at the end of the day, I do this all the time. I speak all over the world, and what happens is, I'm in Madison today. I think my flight leaves at 6 o'clock. I'm going to go back home to Boston, and then I'm just going to live my life like everyone here is. I'm going to do my podcast. I'm going to hang out with my family, my friends. I'm just going to live my life. And, I go to these things a lot of the time and people expecting like, oh man, you're going to change my life, or I'm going to do this and that. And it's like, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to talk, and it's up to you on what you do, because at the end of the day, it's your life. So if it's okay with you guys, I just want to sort of quickly go over my life story and then the different elements that I sort of discovered on the way that helped me sort of get me out of my mess and go to that version 2.0, alongside all the amazing people that I've had a chance to interview on my podcast. My podcast is called Humans 2.0, and I talk to a wide range of people: celebrity chefs, professional athletes, billionaires, really a wide range of people, all encompassing the human experience and what it means to be truly successful, not just a number in your bank account or anything like that. So if that's okay with you guys, I'm ready to do this. What do you think? Yeah? All right. So my story starts off 2 years before I was born, in 1995. And yeah, I was born in 1997, so I'm 22. So it started in 1995 when my parents won a green card lottery visa from Egypt to come to the United States. And they came over here, didn't know English, didn't know anybody. And they just came over here, not really knowing anybody, but just with that main sort of, promise of, my parents were like, let's give our kids a better life. And so they came over here, 1995, with my older sister. We moved in Boston, Massachusetts, East Coast. I was born in 1997. And, I grew up there, had a great, great, great childhood. Very sort of, simplistic, nothing like super crazy happened, thank God. And I have like memories of me in like second, first grade, like when I was 6 or 7, just like, because baseball cards and Pokemon cards at that time, they were like becoming all the rage. I didn't really have any money to buy them. And so I remember as a kid, I'd find just like free newspapers, and I'd go to the sports section, and I'd cut out the baseball figures, and I would get other pieces of paper, and I'd try to glue them together, and I would try to sell them to other kids as like classic retro baseball cards. And I did that, and then I got some money, bought some real baseball cards, bought some Pokemon cards. I remember buying a lot of cookies for me and my friends, and so that's what I remember my childhood to be. But, like I'm sure a lot of us in this room, sometimes you sort of get hit, with like a sort of a series of struggles. And, when I look back at my life, sort of the hand of cards that I was dealt was in second, third grade, we ended up moving to a different place outside of Boston, and sort of more into like the rural western area of Massachusetts. And, my parents were making a little bit more money so we could afford to live out there. And at that time, moved into a very, very small town, maybe 5,000 people. And so it sort of had that small town vibe, small town mentality. So it's just sort of like trapped in a bubble. I don't know if any of you guys have grown up in smaller towns. You know what I'm talking about. And on top of that, in that town, a lot of great people, a lot of awesome people. Just like any place in the world, there's good people and there's bad people. There's good areas, there's bad areas. And so, I remember the school that I went to in that town, there was just like zero diversity. So it was maybe like me and another family that grew up in that town that just looked completely different from everybody else. And again, had a lot of friends. Also experienced my fair share of bullying, like a lot of us have, a lot of racism, things of that nature. People telling me like, we're going to kill you, sand, you know. And so that was happening, and at the same time, at a young age, the same time, I like just came down with like a series of health conditions. Now looking at them, they call them autoimmune disorders, so things like asthma, issues with my gut, issues with my skin, issues sleeping at night, ADHD, all those sorts of things I began to have. And really what began to happen is I just sort of slowly sunk into my own bubble. And I just went to school every day, waking up like super tired, going to school, just sort of putting my head down, not really talking to anybody, sort of entering into this vibe of just like, I'm going to put my head down, do the least amount of work that's possible. And so basically that happened for like basically a decade, since like second, third grade, all the way until I graduated into high school. And so, you know, for a lot of us that hit different kinds of issues and struggles in our lives, there's usually like a coping mechanism. There's usually some sort of area that we go into. You know, for some people, it might be alcohol. For some people, it might be binge eating food. For some people, it might be, you know, trying to take that around, go into the good way and say like, hey, I'm going to become the best baseball player on my team and just go in the morning and just work out every day. My escape was the internet. So I remember, you know, I was born in 97. I remember being on the internet in like 2007, 2008. I worked one standard job my entire life. I worked at a pizza store, just like washed tables, swept the floors, saved up enough money, bought one of those mini laptop netbooks, bought a phone. And once I did that, I just spent all my time online in video games. And, you know, it really got to a point where that was sort of my escape. And I remember making a YouTube channel in like 2009, before YouTube was really YouTube, just me like recording myself playing different video games. And it's so crazy because I remember people, like at that time, like people ask me like, wait, you record videos of yourself and you put them on the internet. And it just seemed like the crazy thing. And for anybody who's in like marketing or business, you know, that's basically what everybody does today. And on top of that, I remember people would say like, wait, you can learn stuff from the internet? And it was just a completely different time, even though I am much younger than a lot of you here, but I still remember when the internet was not really the internet. And so that was my escape, started a YouTube channel, ended up having like 35,000 subscribers back in like 2009. Crazy stuff, but I didn't understand the potential of it at that time, so I quit. On top of that, I got into this game called Minecraft. Has anybody here heard of Minecraft? I bet all your kids play it, right? You know it. So from sort of YouTube and my love of video games, I slowly began to get into Minecraft. And I remember I hopped on there with a couple of my friends. We were like trying to play together on multiplayer servers, which is just like a place where you can go and you can interact with your friends. We joined a couple, but they all sucked. And so when I was 15 years old, I just have this memory of me just saying like, screw this, I'm just gonna start my own. And so the next day, I just sort of Googled my way through how to do it all. It's actually not that, you know, complicated or anything of the sort. I think I just did it. Long story short, 7 months later, it becomes the world's #1 Minecraft server. We have like millions of people on our site. All of a sudden, I'm making hundreds of thousands of dollars. It becomes a 6-figure business. Just really crazy stuff. And so, you know, if you recall back from what I said at the beginning, I never had any money growing up at all. My parents had some money, you know, we just sort of got by. I think I got like $5 allowance maybe. You know, we grew up in a, you know, not so great place in Massachusetts at the start, so we lived off like food stamps, government housing, never had any kind of access to money. And all of a sudden I have hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, you know, for any of you guys listening, it's probably like, man, like this 15-year-old has got all this money. That seems like some kind of fantasy, some kind of dream. And in some ways it definitely was, but believe it or not, it actually made me way more confused, right? Because what had happened was, you know, I was never sort of conscious of this stuff as I was living it, right? There's that quote, it's, you can't see the picture while you're inside the frame. And so I was super confused because I had this unconscious societal narrative that's kind of like the American dream of like, go to school, graduate, go to college to get a degree, work a job, work your way up that job to some like six-figure salary, get married, get a house, get a dog, and then, all your problems in life go away. And so, right? And so that was sort of my unconscious narrative. But then all of a sudden, I made a ton of money, and I had access to that world right now, and I was like, oh crap, this is not what I thought it was. And, I thought, when I make money, I'm gonna life is gonna be awesome. I love myself. None of those things really happened. If anything, life got way, way more confusing because I was growing up, had never read a book on like personal finance, had never read a book in general, to be honest with you, at that time. And, I was growing up and I was making more money than my teachers, most of the kids around me, my parents by far. All these different sorts of power, money dynamics start changing around. And so it was just a super confusing time in my life. And so sort of the way this plays out in the rest of my life is, has anybody here heard of cognitive dissonance? Okay, so cognitive dissonance is essentially when you might have a couple unconscious ideas, couple unconscious beliefs in your head that directly contradict each other. But you don't understand that in your logical mind, and you're just sort of going with the flow. That's why a lot of the times, like, if you ever get into like one of those debates with people, and you're like showing this person, here are the facts, here's the evidence, and they still won't believe you, they might even get upset, they might get emotional, that's that cognitive dissonance. And so I had some cognitive dissonance going on, and it was this idea of sort of my upbringing and all the experiences that basically made me have super, super low self-esteem, really severe social anxiety, could never express myself to not just my friends, but even the close people around me, and that I was a loser, and that I couldn't do anything, and that I'm not going to end up anywhere, and that yada, yada, yada. Then I had this other idea in my head that sort of encompassed what I just said of like, Mark, you are destined for way, way greater. You did that. You made all this money by doing something awesome when you were 15 years old. Most people have never even done that. So like there was a part of me that was like, you can do way, way, way better. And so I go off to college, and that was where it really all sort of began to happen. So I am in deep conflict with both of these ideas going on in my head, but I don't know it at the time, right? And so I just sort of think there's something wrong with me, right? And so you guys ever heard of the freshman 15? Yeah, you go to college, you gain 15 pounds. Yeah, so I gained like the freshman 60 or like the freshman 75. And essentially what had happened was, thank God I never really got into drugs or alcohol. And so my escape slowly began to be with like food, right? I would go to my college's cafeteria, I'd go to the convenience store, basically had like unlimited money on my meal plan. I would go home with like bags of Sour Patch Kids and just a crazy amount of food and just, eat it all, right? And on top of that, on top of the weight, my social anxiety got way, way worse. Got to a point where I was just like socially isolating myself. I would just go to class, and then I'd come back to my dorm room and just like watch Netflix for 6 hours. And that was like my escape. And what ended up happening was, this is a picture of me at that time. But the one thing I want to say is honestly, like my story is not like some kind of weight loss transformational thing. Like I think that's just one very minor aspect of it. So I don't really care about the weight here, but that's my sister, and you see my smile, and you also see my eyes. And what I've learned is that a person's eyes never lie. So that is the fakest smile I've ever seen in my life. And this was at a time where I was literally like at my sort of rock bottom. And the way this unfolded was I always struggled with sleep my entire life. Like I had memories of when I was a kid, and I would like go to sleep at night, close my eyes, and then I would just like be awake for hours. And then next I would hear my parents' alarm because it was like 7 a.m. the next day. So like there were many, many times where I literally just did not sleep. It happened very frequently. And funny enough, the times where I did end up sleeping, I had a severe problem like wetting the bed. Even all the way up until I was 18. And like what I know now is that when you close your eyes to go to sleep, that is one of the very few times throughout the day and throughout our lives that you are alone by yourself, where you don't have a phone to look at. Oops. You don't have let me make sure this isn't messed up. You don't have anything to distract you. You don't have people to talk to, and good and bad distractions. And so sleep is the only time where you're sort of by yourself. And if you haven't sort of come to terms with yourself, or if you have really severe anxiety, oftentimes you won't be able to sleep, or if you do, you will get so scared in your dreams, nightmares, asleep, that you will literally, piss yourself. And so that was my life, and I always struggled with sleep. But at this time when I was in college, when I was like 18, and I was sort of going through this, it got to the point where I just couldn't sleep anymore. And, none of the coping mechanisms I was doing, Netflix or any of that stuff was working anymore. Dipped a little bit into alcohol and drugs, but never really got into it because they didn't work either. And so it got to that point where I just began walking outside at night because I didn't know what else to do. I literally had no idea what was going on. So I would just go on these long walks at like 2 a.m. And it got to this point where I began to like low-key flirt with suicide. And I never at a point was like, I'm going to go buy a gun or I'm going to go jump off this. It was never that. It was just like, I wish this would end because I'm in so much pain. I don't even know what's going on. I don't know how to stop it. And so, the part I grew up in Boston is like, it's in Fenway. For any of you guys know, it's like where the Red Sox play. Very beautiful place. But then also on the outskirts of that town, it has a connecting town that, is not so great. It's called Dorchester. Very, very high crime, just really not a great place at all, but it's getting better. And so I would walk there because I was like, just trying to like fantasize ahead of just somebody walking up to me, just killing me and just ending my life. And I would just never have to explain anything to anybody and it would just end. And so I did that for about 2 weeks. And on one of those nights, I remember, I was walking in the street. I didn't have my headphones plugged in. There weren't any cars going in the street. Everything was just completely silent. And I don't know what happened. And, if anybody believes in, spirituality, some kind of, divine intervention, I began to hear myself for the first time in my life. I began to hear the real me, the real voice on the inside. And I don't really think it told me anything specific. But when I experienced that, I was just like, oh my God, there's something else. There's something bigger. There's something aside from sort of this black and white reality that we all experience on a day-to-day basis. And so that was a picture of me. And I'm going to talk all about it, but I basically, from that point on, just completely turned my life around, lose all the weight, just completely try to reinvest and reinvent my own psychology, physiology, mindset, all those different things, a lot of things with spirituality. And so I also ended up starting a business, ended up starting this podcast, ended up doing a lot of different things. I don't really care about this. I think these are just sort of superficial professional successes. But I sort of went from that kid that was super broken to starting a global top 100 podcast. Literally this week, I got an email from Apple that said, in every single major country, my podcast is in the top 100. In some countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, it's in the top 10, which is literally crazy. I've been on Forbes, all the media stuff. I've worked with my business or spoken alongside executives at Microsoft, New York Times bestselling authors, Olympic athletes. I have clients that have Emmys, work with the Fortune 500. Really just some cool stuff. But again, this is not what I'm after. This is what I'm after. So I posted this on my Instagram 3 weeks ago, and it just says 2016, 220 pounds and living with multiple chronic health conditions. Now, healthy body, energetic, no medications, and living symptom-free. Socially anxious, can never be myself or talk to people. Today, I literally do that, and I just talk to people on my podcast, or I get invited to somewhere on stage to talk about all the things that I feared for the first 18 years of my life. Didn't have any kind of network connections, no money, anything like that. I created a circle of the world's most successful people ever that now help me out at a moment's notice just if I text them. And so the main premise of this, and I'm going to show you every single thing that I did and the steps that I took, the whole premise of this is like, I don't want people to look at me as some kind of special person or some person that was like a phenomenon or an anomaly or anything like that. I have literally interviewed hundreds of people, and I get access to listening to their stories, and a lot of them are way, 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 way worse. And some of them are not as worse. End up turning it around and just completely changing their life, impacting the world at a global scale. Just literally the craziest things. Now at this point, I don't think anything is impossible. And so probably the big question is like, how? Right? Does anybody have any kinds of guesses or anything of the sort? Yes. Mindfulness. Oh yeah, the Forbes article. Yeah. Mindfulness meditation. Definitely, yeah. You got me. At those context clues. So that was like actually one small element of it. I wish Forbes covered a bigger, but the biggest thing that I would say is, and again, none of these things came to me like from the sky. I was like just shot down. I'm like, oh, I got to do this, and that. These were a series of steps that I took forward and backward and had to fall down, and also began to incorporate by getting the information from my guests on the podcast head on. So first and foremost, the truth. Does anybody here in this room want to define truth? What do you think the truth is? Objective reality. Okay, I like that. So I also had that definition of truth, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you, but I feel like a lot of us are chasing sort of the world, right? Of the outside, right? What's actually going on with like the government? What's going on with these corporations? What's going on with the environment? All these different things. And that is where my interest of truth started. But I quickly realized that it's all about the truth of yourself and on the inside. And let me give you guys an example. So I think truth is not necessarily just objective reality, but I think truth is the fundamental layer of your reality and how you see it. And what I began to realize is every single time you are dishonest or you lie, essentially what you're doing is you are projecting a fake version of yourself out into the world, and you're taking the real version of yourself and you're just sort of shoving it to the back. And an example of this is, you're a kid and, the rule in your house is no cookies before dinner. And you're a kid and you see the cookie jar, you grab the cookie, you eat it, you hear your mom coming downstairs. Your mom comes, she kind of sees, crumbs and stuff on your face, and she says, hey, Mark, take a cookie. And in that moment, you sort of have a decision. I can be honest, or because I'm afraid and I just want my mom to love me, I'm probably going to lie and be like, no, I didn't take a cookie. What are you talking about? And she's like, okay. So it's one thing to be dishonest to people, but the bigger issue is with yourself. And what happens is if you do that enough times, next thing you know, you can't even recognize yourself. You can't even recognize what's real about yourself or not. And so, I remember for me, when I first began to experiment with this, I was sitting in my Calculus 2 class in college that I had failed for the second time. And I was sitting in the back of the class. It was like a 6 p.m. class. So at that point, I was just completely fried. And I was like, first off, I'm not a math person. I've mostly failed every single math class I've been in. And I was sitting in this class and I was just sort of like, what is going on? What am I doing with my life? Why am I in these math and computer classes that I don't really have anything taking? And so it was that moment of desperation that I remember led me to pulling out a piece of paper and just sort of writing out who am I? What is the truth about myself? And that seems very, very sort of self-explanatory and straightforward. But what I realized is if you do that, and sorry, what was that? You said, oh, okay, I thought you said something. If you do that, you're going to realize that in the first 5-10 minutes that you sit down and doing this, the logical part of your brain is going to be like, you lied to the dude yesterday. It's going to basically tell you a bunch of shallow things that you want to hear. But if you are able to sit alone for an extended period of time and really just sort of like go deep and like marinate in these experiences, you're going to end up going deep into your psychology and pulling up things that you didn't even realize in your conscious mind. And so I remember that was my very first experience in the journey, the map that sort of began to get me going on the right steps. Now, I'll tell you guys an example. I ended up interviewing a lady by the name of Lauren Zander. Does anybody here know of Lauren? You know her, okay. So she runs this program called Inner You. And essentially she helps like normal people, but also like super famous people. So like actors, like Forrest Whitaker is one of them. Helps them really understand themselves and go deep down. And what she told me on the podcast is exactly what I told you. It's kind of like the fable of Pinocchio, right? Every time you lie, you send a fake version of yourself out there into the world, and you send the real you to the back, okay? Now, what begins to happen is this. As time goes on, you slowly begin to get desensitized from your life. You slowly to lose motivation. Everything just sort of like looks gray or black and white. You sort of begin to lose yourself. And then what happens? You start to drink this thing, you start this thing. And all of a sudden, you get a buzz and you're like, oh my God, like these things are going on. When in reality, that's just you, but you're just shifting your perspective. And so, by the way, it's for anybody that wants to listen to like the hour conversation that we had, it's episode 10, but if you just search for the Humans 2.0 podcast, you'll find it. And it's like for free and everything like that. Find it on Apple, Spotify, all those big platforms. And, I remember walking away from that interview with Lauren, I was just like, holy crap, like all these things that I had gone through in my life and like my own sort of bootstrapped truth exercise was actually on the right path. And so, I sort of like went back into my past and I began to like just think of all the people that I lied to throughout my entire life. And so it was so painful, and I'm still in the process of doing it today. Literally just like going up to my mom and be like, hey mom, remember in the 7th grade when I told you this or when I did this thing? Yeah, I actually lied. I would call up like my old friends and be like, hey, remember this thing? It lied. And the craziest part is when you do that, it is so painful in some sense. But also at the same time, what you begin to realize is when you do that, other people begin to open up for you too. So I remember I was talking to my mom and she begins to open up and she's like, yeah, when I was a kid, I did this, and that. I never really told you about it, and all other family members. And this is really what I think life's really about. And when you sit down and you try to actually find out the truth about yourself, even if you've been telling yourself this like constructed reality for the past 30 years, it's going to be so painful. And that brings me to my next sort of big foundational step that I had to learn, which was pain. Okay? Pain is what actually stops people from heading into the truth. It's what actually stops people from doing what they want to do. And I'll tell you an example. I'll tell you a little bit about this. So I realized that throughout my entire life, even as a kid, I always had access to this. Always. It was always there. I just never stepped up into the moment of becoming my true self. Why? Because I was trying to cope with the pain of life through, various comfort mechanisms, like I had mentioned. What begins to happen is if you don't feel the pain of your life, you never move. You never sort of get that engine in your belly, the fire in your belly, going that's actually going to get you there. And so if you are living in sort of this day-to-day, you're always trying to do what's easy, what's comfortable, what makes you feel good, eventually you're going to look back and pain is going to hit you again and again and again, and you're not actually going to live your own life. And on top of what I had to realize is when I was in college and I was sort of looking at one of the few problems I had slowly become conscious of, which was my social anxiety, I began to realize, like, it's not necessarily just about feeling the pain of today and of your actions, but it's also important to project future pain. Now, this can go one of both ways, so I want to clarify it. So what I had to do was, I imagined myself, I was 18 at the time, and I was like, if I don't get rid of my social anxiety, if I am not able to talk to people, 10 years from now, I'm going to end up just like some random dude that hasn't really accomplished anything with his life, that can't even be himself, that doesn't really have any deep, close relationships, that just sort of ends up taking some job that I know I could do, but doesn't really push me to my full potential. And so when I began to realize that, I was like, if I don't do something about this literally right now, this problem is going to get worse. And so I also began to understand the importance of not just creating your own hell, like the worst case scenario of how this could go bad in 10 years, but also the flip side of like creating a heaven, of like, imagine if I do actually do this, and imagine if I do X, Y, and Z, and all these things that I keep telling myself to do. Imagine 10 years from now where I'm gonna end up. And it's truly, truly crazy. And a person I had a chance of interviewing is Ed Milet. Has anybody here heard of Ed Milet? Yeah, you know him. Ed's a great person. I love him. So Ed told me this phenomenal story of, and Ed is, he's an author. He's like wealthiest 50 people in the world under 50, really awesome guy. And he told me the story of how, you know, all right, hold up. Do you guys notice anything about Ed? What's the first thing that comes to mind? He's ripped, right? He's ripped. Look at his muscles, right? And when I met up with him, that's the first thing I told him. And what he told me is he told me this really interesting story of how he got here. And essentially, he was like in his 30s, 40s, and he ended up going to the doctor. They did a cardiology scan because he was having some issues with his heart. And so he goes to the doctor, and his doctor is like, "You have a daughter?" And he's like, "Yeah, I have a daughter. Do you want to walk her down the wedding aisle?" "What are you talking about?" "Yeah, of course I want to walk her down the aisle." "Okay, do you have a son?" "Yeah." "Do you want to go to his baseball games?" "Of course I do." "Do you, I see you're a rich guy. Do you, do you want another guy walking down with your wife at your daughter's wedding?" And he's like, "What the hell are you talking about, bro? Like, you're my doctor. Why are you talking to me like that?" And he told him, "Listen, young man, if you don't do the exact things that I tell you, you're gonna die." And at that moment, he told him to, eat healthier, exercise, do all the things, we're supposed to. And, he was telling me this, and he was like, because I asked him, "How do you motivate yourself?" And he told me, he's like, "Dude, literally very often I wake up in the morning and I do not want to go to the gym." I'm like, "Oh, I don't want to do this." But every time he thinks of that, he instantly snaps to Bella's wedding, which is the name of his daughter. And so essentially, he is leveraging massive pain, but then also that future vision, that heaven, to get him to do what he actually wants to do. Now, big subject on pain. A lot of people will hear this and they will, say, "Well, I don't really have this problem because I beat myself up too much, or I talk to myself too harshly." And there is a big, big, big difference between, let's say you're obese. Instead of calling yourself fat, which a lot of people who are in that case do, you need to sort of separate your own identity from your behavior. So it's like being in a relationship with somebody, and instead of saying you're a lazy person, it's just you are being lazy. And so if you're able to separate those behaviors, you're much more able to get a grip on it and not beat yourself too much with pain, because I definitely think some people are a little bit leaning a little bit more towards the more pain side. For me, I had the opposite of that issue, but it's so important to understand that you are not those things, right? I am not socially anxious. I was just acting socially anxious. I'm not fat, or nor was I fat. I was just interacting in a series of behaviors that led me to that size. And so if you're able to make that distinction, you're going to be able to go really far with these 2 points of leveraging pain. Now, a big, big thing for me was energy. What do you guys think energy is? How would you define energy? Somebody say something. This is awkward. Come on, guys. Guys, there's people online watching this. Come on. Life force. Oh, I love that. Frequency. Okay, you guys know what you're talking about. So this is the funny part, right? So I'm in sort of the whole self-development world. And oftentimes people talk a lot about like, oh, dude, you just have to think better. You just have to change your mindset. And the matter of the fact is, even if you have the best mindset, even if, for example, your brain tells you the best thoughts, even though I don't really think anybody is in that position because the brain emits 60,000 on a daily average. Not all those are positive. But what I began to realize is you literally cannot be yourself. You literally cannot be the true version of yourself if you don't have energy. If you super lethargic. What time is it right now? Yeah, so it's 3:32. So this is that. So I mean, it's a sensitive phenomenon. Does anybody here Pink's book When? He talks about this phenomenon of in the afternoon, they're globally across the scale, there is just a general decline in performance. So it's pretty interesting I'm giving this talk now. But what I began to realize is this: the more energy you have, the more dimensions of yourself see unfold in front of you, in front of your very eyes, right? So let me give you an example. Let's say you're literally here at this event, and let's say you're feeling super tired. And let's say instead of, walking up to me and asking me a question like you normally would because you want to, or maybe sparking a conversation with the person next to you, you don't because you're tired. And so what I began to realize is a lot of, even growing up as a kid, like I said, I had a ton of health conditions that really sapped my energy, even though I was supposed to be like a young, vibrant, running around kid. Never had that. And so, funny enough, my whole journey here sort of started with me gaining that weight and me just sort of looking at myself in the mirror and being like, wait, what's like sort of going on? Like my pants don't really anymore. Like what's really going on? That was the first sign that I actually knew something was up. And what I began to do, like a lot of people, is I was like, all right, I'm just gonna like try to lose this weight. And I went on Google, I typed in how to lose weight. Anyone else done that? It's like it tells you 50 billion, 55 trillion results, and it's like, go vegan, go carnivore, go paleo, go this, eat 6 meals a day, eat twice a day. It's so confusing. And so I was sort of stuck in that jam, but I did my research and I ended up discovering this guy named Dave Asprey. Has anybody here heard of bulletproof coffee? Like where you put butter in your coffee and like that kind of stuff. So this is the founder of it. I've had the honor of interviewing him. I've also literally just talked to him last Tuesday. And I read his book, and it was actually a recipe book, but in the beginning, it tells you like a little bit of science behind the food. And when I read that book, my mind was blown because up until that time in my life, I had no idea that food actually affects you outside of the sort of shallow understanding, which is like, if I eat too much, I'm going to gain weight. But what I actually discovered is, when you eat food, you are what you eat, right? So the food goes down into your throat, goes to your, oh my God. It goes, one second. So it goes down to your throat, it goes to your gut, your body digests it, and then it creates more of your organs with that thing, right? And so you have to think to yourself, you're like, if I was, say, building a house right now, do I want my foundation be built out of like strong, fibrous material, or do I want it built out of like Doritos and Oreos? And so that was the first time in my life where I actually began to discover, I was like, oh wait, food, if you actually look at the science behind it, which is a new science because a lot of this technology is new, you slowly begin to realize that I think the top 3 most yielding behaviors in your day is what you put into your mouth. And what I began to discover is, and everyone has to sort of go on their own like health journey. There's no such thing as a universal healthy diet, but there are definitely some fundamentals, okay? So when I began to eat a lot of just like nutrient-dense food, like vegetables, things that come from the ground and like healthy fats that come from animals. What I began to realize is, you take a look at all of our cells. The majority of our cells are made out of fat. Our brain is primarily made out of fat. I remember growing up, I don't think I ever ate anything that had fat except for like maybe eggs and then maybe unhealthy fats, like French fries, hamburgers, things along that nature. And so what I began to discover is when I ate those foods, for the first time in my life, I felt my brain turned on. The very first time in my life, I felt it turned on. And what happens is when you begin to eat healthy, you slowly become not so dependent on the other foods that like everyone just sort of snacks on throughout the rest of the day, like sodas and all kinds of processed foods and like these little things that come with like in these little bars that are colorful and they try to grab your attention. If you go to the cereal aisle, for example, that's where like most kids cry. Why? Because scientists are the people that make these kinds of foods, and they've literally put in billions of dollars studying our psychology. So there's a theory out there, it's not 100% confirmed, but it says the reason why humans developed color vision is so that we could see fruit up on a tree and grab it. Scientists also know that, so why do you think all the cereal boxes are like bright colors of red and yellow and green? All these things are essentially created to take advantage of our physiology. I had never known that throughout my life. And when that happens, cut out alcohol, soda, anything that's processed, just completely ate clean, whole foods. My life completely changed. And what happened was, once you begin to eat healthy, once you begin to gain that energy in your body, and it can take a while depending on the person, you gain way more energy than you even know what to do with. And what happens is, you're like, okay, so what else can I do, right? So I was like, dude, I've got energy. I'm just going to start going for walks. Started going for walks. I'm like, dude, I could probably run, right? Start running. And then I start, going to the gym. What happens when you start gaining that energy from physical exercise? Then, if you do it at night, then you're like, oh man, I'm a little bit more tired today, so I'm going to go to sleep. And then you start going to sleep properly for the first time in your life, getting, 7.5 hours plus or minus 30 minutes. You begin to experience an insane amount of energy. And for anybody who's like never even stumbled on this, I highly, highly recommend you try this out. And what happens is you keep going down that track. You're like, I literally have so much energy, I don't know what to do. And so what happens is you literally begin to find time to do these activities, right? So as I was gaining energy, I quickly realized that like I had so much more, not only time, but the cognitive energy to think clearer and do things. So I was like, I'm going to start reading books. It was the first time I, began reading books. I began to read a ton of self-development books. And in those, everyone was talking about like meditation and mindfulness, and it's important to be grateful. I was just, Jacob was just showing me through the DreamBank exhibit, and they've got like all these gratitude prompts and all these different things. And so essentially, when you begin to go on this journey, it becomes a runaway train. And you gain so much energy that you're just constantly working. And what begins to happen is you begin to realize like, oh wow, I actually had access to this the entire time of my life. And if I have more energy, I can give way more to my family, to my friends, to my job, not just sort of like show up, but actually be present and have my brain turn on. Now, I will say this. You could eat all the kale and broccoli you want, and you could still hate your life, right? So that's a big caveat because you need to be engaged with what you're actually doing, right? So when I used to be in college and I was sitting in all these classes, I literally thought I was dying. Even when I had started this sort of energy kick, and it helped a lot, but I was like, wait, why am I sitting down in this classroom, looking at all these numbers, learning all this theoretical crap, and what we do in the classroom literally has zero world impact. That was pretty strange to me, and I was not engaged with that. And I don't mean to say anything bad about schools or classrooms. Some people can do it right, some people can do it bad. My sister is a teacher in a public high school. And so I think there's a massive, massive importance for that. And for Dave Asprey, for example, he like I did, he grew up with the diseases of aging. So when he was 13, he had like arthritis. When he was like 15, his hip disintegrated because he didn't have any kind of bone. And what he began to realize is that essentially, a lot of these different diseases, a lot of these chronic illnesses are caused by chronic inflammation, okay? And inflammation is the messaging signal of the body. It can be good and it can also be bad. But essentially what happens is if you are constantly signaling off inflammation in your body, whether it's in your joints or your hip or your liver or your brain, it can be very, very, very bad for you. And what happens is the two biggest causes of inflammation in the human body are one, psychological trauma, which is like the big, big thing, and I won't even go into that. The second one is food. So it's just like you take a look at both of those and you're like, man, I should really, really eat healthy. But, eating healthy and gaining energy, if I was sitting in this audience and I was listening to this, I'd be like, dude, this guy's full of crap. Like, what are you talking about? How can I gain more energy? How can I not be tired? And the first experience that I tried this was through trying Bulletproof coffee. Okay, and I'm not sponsored, I'm not affiliated by them in any whatsoever. You might think this is absolutely crazy, but essentially it's taking coffee, you put grass-fed butter into that, and you put MCT oil, which is essentially a very pure form of coconut oil. That's all it is. And so you blend that and you drink that. What happens is, for most people, the two big sort of energy highways in our body are glucose and ketones. Our body mostly breaks down everything into glucose. The other big one is through ketones, which is through fat. And what happens is ketones is the fastest available form of energy to the human brain. You usually enter it by entering into a state of ketosis, which is essentially 2 weeks. You don't eat any carbs at all, and you just eat fat. However, MCT oil, which is the purest form of coconut oil on this earth, and also butter and coffee using caffeine as a vehicle, it can actually do the same thing. And so I remember trying out this coffee. Like, it's so funny because when I was on Google and I was searching how do I gain energy, how to lose weight, I saw a Google ad for putting butter in your coffee. I'm like, what the heck? There's no way, first off, this actually works. It's got to be a gimmick, right? But, I was at that point, I was super desperate, so I just did it. I bought the supplies and whatnot, began to make coffee for the first time in my life, just on my own in my kitchen, began to blend this up. What happens is you begin to get a taste of what it feels like to actually have energy in your mind and in your body. And so energy is just a big, big part of your journey because, again, even if you're reading like all the right books, even if you're surrounding yourself with the best kind of people, but you don't have that physiological, biological layer of energy, you're just not going to go that far or not as far as you could go. So this is probably debatably the biggest one, system, right? So what I discovered was when I began my self-development journey, and for anybody else who's on this journey, sometimes it can be super, super challenging, it can be super difficult, but you also know it's worth it. And so there were so many moments on my journey, especially early on, where I was just like, man, I should just quit. And that beginning part is always a massive hump. But what I began to realize is there's two reasons for life, in my opinion. There's two priorities, really. One of them is your rate of self-evolution, which is kind of like all the stuff we've been talking about, how you can grow your mindset, all these things. The other one is how can you be of service to other people? How can you help other people? What can you do, not just as like this isolated node in this world, but how can you actually connect yourself and get in touch and create this? And so what I'm talking about is, you're super tired, but you have kids, right? You have a family, and you're like, this sucks right now, but I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to power through because I have other people that rely on me. I did this in the form of my family and friends, but also in the form of a business. So when I literally just went from like rock bottom to switching this out, I ended up starting a business, and that's because I knew sort of entrepreneurship was always in my veins. It was always there. That was sort of my vehicle. Never really got into sports or any of those things. So that was my vehicle. And so what I did was I started a business, not so much because I wanted to change the world or make money, but because I knew I had to have had something bigger than myself to rely on in times where I may not have the willpower, when things are going wrong left and right. And so that was a way where I could sort of be like, I'm going to wake up at 6 a.m. and like do all these habits and all these cool things. So, at 11 a.m. I have a client call, and I have a staff team, and I have people that rely on me. And so that was one way I did it. Another way I did it was through creating a morning routine, sure. But another one was actually starting my podcast. So I ended up starting my podcast in like the middle of 2017. And it was a time where my business really wasn't working. I was having issues with my health again. I was just having issues left and right. And I realized, one of the best ways you can learn from something, one of the best ways you can learn about something in this world is just by having a direct conversation with somebody who's like in the field, somebody who is actually doing it, right? Not somebody who just, reads headlines of articles and thinks they're an expert, or not somebody who just reads or writes about it, somebody who actually does it, a real practitioner. And so when I was 20 years old at the time, I was sort of looking at this and I was like, how can I get in contact with these kinds of people? How can I get in contact with the people out there that are doing amazing, amazing things, right? There's probably no way, if I sent one of them an email and I was like, hey, I'm like this 20-year-old kid, can I pick your brain? Highly doubt they would say yes, right? And so I knew that I had to create sort of this public media, press, podcast thing to get people to let me to interview them. And what began to happen was, as I began to do interview after interview, essentially it really became just like an accountability. It became a system that I put myself in so I could always be learning. I could always be engaged. I could always be understanding what's out there. And what happened was, if you go through my podcast, you'll realize I sort of go through like seasons of different topics. And what I do is like, if I'm interested in something, like let's say I pick up meditation, I'm going to reach out to the top 10 best meditation experts in the world, and I'm going to talk to them and be like, yo, how do I do this, right? And so through that, you form relationships. These people slowly start to become your friends, and you really begin to create a system of yourself that is much, much bigger than yourself, that is constantly keeping you in this cycle, right? Obviously, this can go bad, right? You could have habits that you don't really think about anymore, but you just sort of do. So that's a big part of it. And somebody I've had the honor of interviewing, James Clear. Has anybody here heard of James Clear, author of Atomic Habits? Yeah, so, first and foremost, you better write that down. That's a book I highly, highly recommend, Atomic Habits by James Clear. It came out like a year ago, and I think it's still on like the top 10 New York Times bestsellers list for a good reason. And it's like a relatively short read, too. So, I ended up interviewing James, and James created this book on how you can create this habits in life that will get you, really, really far in your life. I'm sorry, I just got distracted. They told me to start wrapping up. But, I want you guys to read this book. It's so important to create a system for yourself. But, when it comes to habits, when it comes to creating those systems, it's so important, right? Because a lot of us here, you got to set a goal, right? You got to make goals. And goals are great. You've got to have a mission. You've got to be looking forward at something. But also at the same time, if you're making a goal about something you haven't done yet, you're sort of writing this down based on your level of awareness of something that hasn't even happened yet. And so for me, like all my goals changed because the big thing is, if you create a system of habits, a system of these high-value actions that you do every single day, next thing you know, you're going to wake up like 3 years later, you're going to be like, oh my God, all these different things are happening because I did these things every single day. It's so important. A quick example from his book that I think is powerful to share is a 2-minute rule, okay? And essentially what this is a lot of people try to pick up habits, like let's say, I'm going to start going to the gym, right? And somebody just sort of haphazardly, one day when they get off work early, they hit the gym, they're like super motivated, they're in it, they go on the treadmill, they start lifting weights, they wake up the next day and they're just so sore and they're like, oh my God, that was the worst thing I've ever done. And they don't even go to the gym until like a week later, and they show up and they're like, oh, I have to do this again. And what James talks about is this thing called the 2-minute rule. And it's essentially, when you're first creating a habit for the first time, it's not necessarily building a habit to go to the gym, it's building the habit of showing up. And so what he says is like, you can wake up in the morning, put on your shoes, get in your car, drive to your gym, walk into your gym for 2 minutes, I don't know, retie your shoes, try to stretch, look at yourself in the mirror, and leave. Walk out. Now, this sounds literally crazy to people because they're like, wait, isn't the whole point of this to get myself to go to the gym and become healthier? Well, yeah, but the real thing that you're trying to master is just showing up. And so if you can do that for like a week, 2 weeks, depending on the kind of person you are, you're going to notice that now you're actually going to the gym. And then you can start to be like, let me see what kind of workout programs I should Google. Let me talk to this personal trainer, whatever they have at the gym. And so that's a massive thing. So again, definitely listen to the podcast episode we did, episode 202, and I highly, highly recommend his book. So the last thing here is probably the most important. It's this concept of going 24/7, okay? Now what I'm talking about is just life, okay? So at any point in our lives, does life stop, right? And what I mean is like, you wake up, you go to sleep, life is still going on 24/7, even if you're there mentally or not. And on top of that, basically all religions, traditions have this concept of we are eternal, right? When we die, our soul, our spirit is going to go somewhere. So life is basically 24/7. And this is so important to realize because a lot of us can get distracted by short-sighted goals, right? You can say to yourself, I'm going to do all this so I can make $5 million, okay? Let's say you reach that, and then you're like, oh, wow, that wasn't actually the entire point of life. And the reason why I did those things in the first place was for this very short-sighted goal of getting $5 million. Now, again, you've got to have goals. It's super important. But if you can understand that life is 24/7, you're going to stop doing things for the short term. And life is the long term. It's all about long-term yields, right? The reason why I'm up here, the reason why my podcast is in the top 100, speak, the reason why I have business, the reason why I'm fulfilled and I'm mentally happy is because I always take the long-term route. I don't ever do things for the short-term pleasure. I'm always trying to extend that line of sight of vision. Why is it important? It's important because life is never going to stop, never going to end. Doesn't matter if you have $1 billion, doesn't matter if you're super healthy. You've got to make sure you're good, right? So a great person, this is Amy Morin. She's the author of 13 things mentally strong people don't do. Has anybody here heard of her? So she has a crazy story. So she becomes a therapist, is sort of aware of psychology, is trying to help herself, is trying to help other people get through. Mom, just sort of out of the blue, suddenly has a brain aneurysm, and she dies. And she begins to get over that, begins to sort of apply the same things she learned in school to help her. Next thing you know, her husband dies. Yeah. And she does the same thing, tries to get over it. Next thing you know, she has another family member die. And she came out with this piece on the internet. It's called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. Piece went totally viral. Some rappers talk about it in their songs. And she's a great example of life never ends. I could, forbid, walk here. I could get hit by, a bus, and I could die, and I could go up to heaven or hell or whatever you believe in. But life in and of itself is never, ever going to stop. The problems are never going to end. And so if you understand that, and you sort of understand, I'm not just going to do this for the short term, 2 minutes. I'm going to do this for life and, my legacy and what people will say after me when I'm dead. That's super, super, super important. And so, I used to go to a ton of these events. I really just go to these events when I get invited to speak. But, I just threw so much information at you. And just to recap, number one, truth. This is the base layer of reality. If you don't start with this, even if you think you go far, you're actually going in reverse and you're not going to get very far. Pain, make sure you actually feel what's going on in your life right now and leverage it for good. Energy, make sure you have the physiological and also the mental energy to do what you want in life and be yourself. System, make sure you're not just sort of doing things on your own. Make sure you surround yourself with a bigger system than yourself. And 24/7, it never ends. And so, I just threw a ton of information at you. And what I do is I always take notes, or I sometimes like to make sort of commitments to myself. And so this is a time where I would open you guys up to be don't just let an hour that I've been speaking here just go to waste. Make sure you write down okay, this is something that experiments. I'm going to go do research on this. I'm going to go try this out. Make sure you actually do something, because I know so many people that go to these talks, that read books, they never do anything with their life. They never go anywhere because they're just sort of mentally up here, and they're just I got to learn this thing, or I read this or that, but they never take action. So I think this is the most important piece. Another thing is this. I don't think any time in your lives would a 22-year-old dude just be talking to a group of very successful, a little bit older than me individuals. The matter of fact is, right? And this is why our world is literally changing so fast. There are so many great things going on in this world, and there are also so many terrible things that are going on. And this is just a sort of call to action of the world literally needs us. If you grew up in a developed nation, and even here in America, we have loads of issues. The world literally needs you. And so if you're able to work your way out of concentric circles, start with yourself, start working on yourself, eventually what will happen is the people that you surround yourself with, the people that you love, they will see that and they will begin to change themselves. Biggest thing is you can't change anybody, and I don't even think you can change anything out there until you change yourself. And so I think this is just a sort of big call to action, just the world needs you. Pick an issue, go do your thing, and get on it, because if I've been able to do this, literally anybody can. And so definitely connect with me. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. My name is Mark Metry, M-A-R-K, M-A-T-R-Y. If you listen to podcasts, check out Humans 2.0, anywhere you listen to it. Definitely get in touch. Thank you guys for having me.